The world's biggest problems aren't political or economic. They're a failure of imagination. Too many of us are watching the news, looking at the wars in the market, and we're feeling hopeless. We've been taught to accept the world as it is, even when the math ain't mathing. Now, my mind first opened to what the future could be from watching Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek from back in the days. And he pointed to a possible framework. But his vision, as groundbreaking as it was, had its limit. It wasn't my future. It wasn't built from my history. And that's why I had to turn to the tradition of Afrofuturism, a philosophy built by us for us. And I'm going to show you how Afrofuturism is a practical tool to dismantle the present and pull a better future towards you starting today. So a few days ago, I was listening to Brian Scott video about the Council of Nine. And in it, he mentioned Gene Roddenberry and someone else that I'd done in a work with. And it really struck a chord to have me just kind of think back to my history of watching Star Trek from when I was really young. And I, consider myself a Trekkie. I read Octavia Butler's sci-fi novels, and there's just so many different things that just kind of peppered through my experience growing up. And I could see that it wasn't just a TV show. And as a matter of fact, Brian Scott puts it that the Galactic Council of Nine had certain humans that got these transmissions and these messages, and it showed up in TV shows and it showed up in many other ways. And it had me start thinking about this in this current time. It's been my lifelong exploration of what's possible, what grounds the big ideas and have it a relatable moment. So these are some of my foundational seeds of thinking beyond what's possible. Now, I'm thinking about what's possible because I am someone who studied and practiced and lived from Hermetic principles. And so when I look out at the world, I have to take an assessment. And what I see is that these are wars of the few. And what I mean by that is you look at the world leaders that represent or supposedly represent the people of their nations, and they are the few, right? And the rest of the people in their nations, in their countries, in their states, etc., are the majority. And what I see is that world leaders need the numbers to leverage power. I mean, that's not the only thing by any stretch of the imagination. If you visualize this, think of something that has or comes to a peak, and then what's underneath it, think of it as a pyramid or a pyramid scheme. This gives you the sense, and it's mostly male, and they're making decisions that impacts the majority. And it also benefits a tiny few, while the masses are just the numbers behind those leaders in that system. And, the design is making sure that the shareholder gets their value over everything. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that if someone invests in a company, they ought to have a return on their investment. But when it's disproportionate and when it's at the expense of people, that requires some reevaluation. And it requires that we don't take it as the truth, as the way it is in a way we accept it. And we're starting to see that conglomerates don't need people. However, that is not accurate. You need to feed the plants. You need to grow the things. You need to reinvest. That's where you pour back into something. This is a time where we're reconnecting to antiquity during this time of modernity. What do I mean by that? If we look back to our ancestors, and yes, technology and growth, when used well, it's great. When we think about antiquity, there was community. There's always been community. But our cultural values today have been replaced by something else. And we rocked with that something else for better or for worse, it's not sustainable. But if you allow yourself to check in with your body, because the body is a technology. I believe that your body is your craft, it's your ship, it's your temple. You cannot get around without it. You cannot live in this game without a body. When you go back into your body technology and connect with it, you can feel what it's telling you. You can sense what it's telling you. So when you tap into that body technology and you start to ask, does this feel great? Does this system, does these values resonate? And when you drop in, and you will likely get a resounding no. So this is what I'm talking about with antiquity. Without the external distractions, our ancestors had to rely on nature, and we still rely on nature because we are nature. We're connected. We release these bodies and it goes back to nature. Whether you do one or two things, whether you bury the body or you incinerate it, it's going back into nature. This has been a failure of individualism. So really, this top-heavy system has been a failure. You think of how it's produced individuals to be in a silo. Think of tubes, individual tubes standing next to each other. Now, if you think of being side by side, arm by arm, and withstanding the pressure together, there is a different output when that happens. And now we can see that with a system that rewarded individual above all others, this is where the system is crashing. There was a time in community was cared for. And I know that sometimes this presses on people's feeling that, hey, only the strong will survive and outwin. And that is not accurate to nature. We could take a look at our fellow animals and learn a few things from them. Now, here's something that I will share with you. I call it my penny theory. And this is out of my experience. I remember several years ago having this famine cycle, and I started to see how pennies were strewn all over the place. You can see them on the ground, you can see them in the supermarket, and you can see sometimes people leave them around cash registers. And I just thought, like, wow, this is pretty fascinating, because here's money. And if you're looking for money and you're in a famine season, pennies are currency, okay? And then I started to think, like, this is really symbolic. Here we have a penny that used to be made from copper, and melanated people, have referred to ourselves as black people, were initially considered themselves copper people, copper complexion. And so here we have these pennies that were made from copper, and then what president is minted on the pennies? Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was symbolic of a president that freed people who were enslaved, ancestry that were enslaved in the States, right? I know there's so many different things that you can hear, and there's complexities to human beings, and I do understand the full story in history. I shouldn't say full, but another side of Lincoln, and was he really emancipating enslaved people for a point of morality, or was it economic? But nonetheless, He was symbolic representation of freeing prisoners of war, aka people who were enslaved, aka ancestry, right? The original copper melanated people of this part of the Americas. Okay. So here we have the copper penny. We have the president on the penny and what he represented. We're putting it all together. Even if we go with what our history books have said, we have the copper penny. We have the president known for emancipating enslaved melanated people of North America. Okay? Tossed about. Nobody cares about a penny. But let me tell you something. When you put all those pennies together, and when you concentrate those pennies, and you put them, and you go to the Coinstar machine, and you cash them in, you're like, whoa, I had no idea that these were like $20 worth of pennies. But in the meanwhile, you know, if you're looking for cash, you're hoping that there's dollars, there's 20s, there's a 10 or 50. Maybe you could find that somewhere on the ground. Like now you've collected all of these pennies and you've gone to the Coinstar machine, or maybe you just kept pennies in your jar and then you cashed them out. And you had no idea how much all of those pennies compounded to create a value, something that's just tossed away. Now let that sink in. So my point is this is no different than when melanated people come together and compound their resources, their energy, their essence to enrich each other, to have wealth. And this has been shown in history. And this is why a disruption in a people is beneficial to others. So if every person is a penny full of hidden value in history, then think of Afrofuturism as the Coinstar machine. Stay with me. It's the technology that pulls all of this scattered value together to compound on value, on worth. So what is Afrofuturism? It is more than just an aesthetic. It's Afrofuturism does more than imagine the future. It heals the past. For people whose history has been erased, hidden, stolen, and whose timeline has been fractured, Afrofuturism is a tool that helps us reclaim our story, our history. It also looks at ancient spiritualities and cosmologies and traditions that go way back. And I know and I understand that one of the things that we're sorting out now is differences based on region. And I think that that's key. And so what Afrofuturism also does is it looks at ancient African spiritualities, cosmologies, and traditions, and it remixes them with advanced technology. What it says is that our magic was always the technology. Our ancestors were always the architects of the future. So it is a way that we're stitching our timeline back together from the deepest roots to our furthest futures. And that's exactly how we're going to use it. Not as entertainment, but as the blueprint for our own liberation. Let me bring this back home. So the question isn't just what kind of world do you want to live in? It is, are you willing to start picking up the pennies? Are you willing to see value in yourself and the people next to you, even when the world said you lacked value? And I always say that The people that are paid the most attention to, but are said to be the least of value, flip it upside down. We cannot talk about value and worth without addressing your individual way of navigating this world. So when releasing old world narratives, I find that looking at cosmology, looking at planets and how the planets are the influencers, but you always have free will. Okay. I say that the planets are in the sky as our influencers, reflecting back or projecting, right? So it depends on which direction you're looking in, to remind us of our individual blueprint, our individual way of navigating certain thoughts and energies. And that's why I created the Moon Compass app. So the Moon Compass app gives you a chance to see how you nurture and how you want to be nurtured, versus a narrative that says this is the way men's supposed to be, this is the way women are supposed to be, this is the way kids are, whatever sub-container, sub-category that the external has said to you and us. If you understand your natural way and embracing it, that becomes your path to freedom. That becomes your way of understanding yourself. So in the Moon Compass app, start to formulate how we relate to ourselves and to others. So go ahead and check it out. If you already know your moon sign, you can bypass putting in your birth information. Go ahead and see what your reading is about. And this is why I created the Moon Compass Challenge. Because really understanding how we feel and how we nurture ourselves is our own personal blueprint. And then we stop locking in to what the external is telling us how to feel and how to relate. And that's the starting point of the heart, of the nurturing. All right. This next video is specifically recommended for you. And I will see you the next time. Thank you for joining me on Living Off the Wall Mercurial Wednesdays. Mwah! Bye for now.